Hello, everybody. So this video is bringing you the sad tidings, if you haven't heard them already, that unfortunately Matthew Perry has been called to the great big stage in the sky for his eternal performance. So it was just yesterday, Mr. Perry was pronounced dead. So he's best known for that late '90s hit show Friends. That's what really made his name, and that's when I first became aware of him when I was a schoolboy about these six 20-something New Yorkers. They'd recently finished college. They're all living in a shared flat very close to Central Park. One works as a waitress, in a cafe called Central Perk. But it's very much idealized view of Manhattan lifestyle, as though these precariously employed young people could afford a fairly luxurious apartment in downtown Manhattan. Now, I mean, I've only been to New York twice, but methinks that was unrealistic even then. And these days, people say, "Oh well, it's not diverse enough. They're all white heterosexuals, and they have these chopping and changing relationships with each other. And there's a brother and sister pair, and then one of them has a relationship with Tom Selleck, who's like 25 years older than her, who was a dad's friend, and things like that." But anyway, it was a worldwide hit show. I remember people even in Pakistan watching it, and oh my god, OMG, becoming popular. When Rachel, played by Jennifer Aniston, gets a tiny tattoo, and that's becoming mainstream because a generation prior to that they'd been preserved only of sailors and hookers, and I wonder what those two had to do with each other. Um, but that was Matthew Perry, someone who played a sort of eponymous chap in almost everything he was in. And he was an Ally McBeal a little bit later on about that up and coming female lawyer. The West Wing, the Ron Clark story, often not terribly serious roles, almost heroes, Fools Rush In, the whole 9 yards, the whole 10 yards, 17 again, Fallout, last New Vegas. He was panned as a lightweight and not terribly serious actor, and all these just sort of feel good films and series and situation comedies. He portrayed Ted Kennedy and the Kennedys after Camelot. Camelot being the way that the name that Jackie Kennedy, as in the widow of JFK, gave to JFK's Camarilla in the White House, saying, it'll always be remembered as Camelot. But people do say there was a dark side to Camelot. He was up to all sorts of nefarious activities, JFK. But anyway, I digress as usual. Back to Matthew Perry. Fairly good-looking chap, slightly above average height, even featured, neither macho nor effeminate. Almost an everyman, but obviously very self-assured. And when I saw him interviewed, it's almost like he wasn't acting when he played these roles, because that really was his personality. He was giving the lines. So he's born in Massachusetts. He was Canadian on his mother's side, American on his father's side. He had a slightly difficult upbringing with his parents splitting up when he was quite young, a number of step siblings, half siblings, and so on. Spending some time in Massachusetts, but then also in Canada, living there for several years. He said he was a fairly troubled adolescent. He was into pilfering things, smoking in his early teens, which was not unusual. Bear in mind, he's born in 1969. It's the early 1980s. So it was very easy to get hold of tobacco underage in those days. And then fighting and things like that, abusing alcohol, underperforming at school. But he was at least an outstanding tennis player, and that was very good for his self-esteem. It was only much later that he got into acting. Then he moved to Los Angeles in the late 1980s. But I don't think he ever pursued higher education, actually. But he'd been an actor a little bit in his childhood, but that's when he really threw himself into it. And then he had bits and bobs of work through the early 90s. There's Beverly Hills 90210. I remember the early 90s was an extremely popular series set in a high school in an exclusive area, as in that was a zip code 90210, or as I like to call it, 90,210. But none of them went on to have huge careers after that. They peaked too early. Although they're playing teenagers, they're often mid-20s when they were in that show. But he was not part of the core cast. But what really made his name is when Friends was launched when he was 24, and he played a character called Chandler Bing. Jennifer Aniston, it was the thing that really made her famous. Courtney Cox was in it, Lisa Kudrow, Matt LeBlanc, and David Schwimmer. So Matt LeBlanc was meant to be the really hunky guy in it. So yeah, it was an absolute smash hit all around the world. So they, you put six quite good-looking people together in a situation comedy where there's always a happy outcome, and then you can't go wrong having some excellent music to boost it as well, and a lot of puns and things like that. And they had guest appearances by Jean-Claude Van Damme, who's walking along with Courtney Cox's character, and she says, "Well, I can't believe you agreed to go on a date with me." She's been set up by her friend Jennifer Aniston, or sorry, Rachel, as I should say, and Jean-Claude Van Damme says, "Well, I agreed to go on a date with you because your friend told me how much you wanted a threesome, but we're going to have to agree a few ground rules first." And Courtney Cox is horrified by this, and so it goes on. So yeah, he was in television all the time. He didn't really make it into major films and so on. So yeah, he had a number of high-profile relationships. For example, with Julia Roberts, who I think was a bit who was just the same age, and he was interviewed on chat shows such as by Ellen DeGeneres. He wasn't seen as terribly involved in politics, but he said he did struggle with various health problems from abusing drugs and from alcoholism, and he went public about suffering erectile dysfunction from having drunk too much. But he didn't, I don't think, identify with either the Democrats or the Republicans. I mean, being a Democrat supporter seems to be de rigueur for American actors, but he fought shy of that. And I think he was just sort of unpolitical. I don't think he ever got married or had children, actually. So that's it. You'd say, you think the guy who lived quite a healthy lifestyle, isn't it quite shocking that he died early? But they've not yet determined the cause of death. He was found dead in his hot tub. I think that means not the actual bath. So I suppose he didn't live a terribly healthy lifestyle earlier on because of his alcohol abuse. He'd had his demons. So as so many actors, that their public persona can be quite different from how they are in private. So he might really be down in the dumps, a much more melancholic character. So perhaps he was self-medicating against childhood sorrow and angst. But nobody had a bad word to say about him. And I think he used to smoke as well. I think that came out. David Schwimmer said that on the set, that Schwimmer was the only one who didn't used to smoke in those days. So let that be a warning to you not to get into alcohol and things like that. There's a number of films, but they're all actually quite minor ones. A Night in the Life of Jimmy Reardon, Birds of America, things you mostly haven't seen about. So yeah, he did what he wanted to do, and he won a number of awards. So well, he's a sort of a gentleman of American theatricality. So yeah, do what you want to do with your life. You only die once, as I like to say. So don't hold back. Do it now. Don't trust in tomorrow too much. So if you want to subscribe on Patreon, that'd be fantastic, and see thousands of articles and videos behind the paywall. Moreover, donate on Patreon. By the way, is it clearer now that I'm using this microphone? Tell me about the sound quality. Goodbye.